whisper. Not all vacations end with happy memories. A group of friends, deep in the Canadian woods, thought they'd found the perfect escape. In a tiny wooden cabin, they were looking forward to a weekend of relaxation and adventure, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, strange things started to happen. The forest, once inviting, now seemed to close in around them, the trees whispering secrets in the wind. First, it was the whispers, barely audible, but unmistakably sinister. They seemed to come from all directions, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. Then the scratching on the windows, as if something, or someone, wanted in. The sound was relentless, echoing through the cabin and sending chills down their spines. One night, they found symbols carved into the walls, symbols that weren't there before. The markings were ancient and cryptic, filling them with a sense of dread. The air grew colder, and shadows danced. Even when there was no light, the temperature drop was sudden and unnatural, making their breath visible in the dim light. They tried to leave, but the path back was gone. Swallowed by the forest, the once familiar trail had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable wall of trees and underbrush. Panic set in, and they realized they weren't alone. The forest seemed alive, watching their every move, and the feeling of being hunted grew stronger with each passing moment. Something was watching, waiting. They could feel its presence, a malevolent force lurking just out of sight, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. Their dream vacation had turned into a nightmare. The cabin, once a symbol of peace and tranquility, now felt like a prison, trapping them in a waking horror. And in the heart of the woods, no one can hear you scream. The silence of the forest was deafening, amplifying their fear and despair. They knew they had to find a way out, but the forest had other plans, huddled together. They tried to stay calm, but the flickering candlelight only made the shadows more menacing. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the leaves outside sent their hearts racing. The fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, obscuring their vision and heightening their sense of isolation. They could barely see a few feet in front of them, and the fear of the unknown grew stronger. Desperate for warmth and light, they tried to start a fire, but the matches kept failing, as if the forest itself was conspiring against them. The cold seeped into their bones, and the darkness seemed to close in. The sounds of the forest, once a symphony of nature, now felt like a cacophony of terror. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves was a reminder that they were not alone. They looked at each other, fear etched on their faces, and knew they had to stick together. Their bond was their only hope, but the forest seemed determined to break them. With determination, they decided to face whatever was out there, together. They knew the forest held many secrets, but they were resolved to uncover the truth and find a way out, armed with makeshift torches. They stepped out into the dark forest, ready to confront the unknown. The path ahead was uncertain, but they knew they had to keep moving. The forest loomed around them, a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, but they pressed on. The moonlight cast eerie silhouettes guiding their way through the darkness. Finally, they found a hidden path, a glimmer of hope in the oppressive darkness. Relief washed over them, but they knew the journey was far from over. With renewed determination, they followed the path, hoping it would lead them to safety. The forest still whispered its secrets, but they were no longer afraid. As dawn broke, they emerged from the trees, exhausted but victorious. The nightmare was over, but the memories would haunt them forever. They hugged each other, grateful to be alive, and vowed never to return to the forest. Their terrifying night in the Canadian cabin was a story they would never forget. The forest, now bathed in daylight, seemed almost peaceful, but they knew the darkness it could hold. They left the cabin behind, a silent witness to their ordeal. Driving away, they felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. The forest had changed them, and they knew they would never be the same. The cabin stood empty, a relic of their terrifying night, and the forest returned to its eerie silence. The whispers and shadows remained, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitors. And in the heart of the woods, no one can hear you scream. The forest keeps its secrets, and the terror never truly ends. The night grew darker, and the sounds outside the cabin became more unsettling. The wind howled through the trees, and the creaking of the wooden floorboards echoed through the empty rooms. Suddenly, a loud bang came from the kitchen. They froze, hearts pounding in their chests. The sound was unmistakable. Something had knocked over a heavy object. Gathering their courage, they cautiously made their way towards the kitchen, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. As they stepped into the room, the air grew colder, their breath visible in the dim light. The kitchen was in disarray, chairs overturned, and the table pushed against the wall. In the center of the room lay a large cast-iron pot, its contents spilled across the floor. But it wasn't the mess that caught their attention. It was the symbols carved into the wooden table, the same ancient cryptic markings they had found on the cabin walls, now etched into the very heart of their sanctuary. A sense of dread washed over them as they realized the symbols were fresh, newly carved. Someone, or something, was inside the cabin with them. The realization sent chills down their spines, and they knew they had to act fast. They searched the kitchen, looking for any clues that might explain what was happening. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, made them jumpy and paranoid. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, a cold breeze brushed past them, extinguishing the candlelight. They were plunged into darkness, the oppressive silence broken only by their ragged breathing. In the pitch black, they fumbled for their makeshift torches, desperate to restore the light. When the torches finally flickered to life, they saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the kitchen. Its eyes, glowing with an eerie light, bore into them, filled with malevolent intent. The figure didn't move, but its presence was suffocating, a dark force that seemed to drain the very air from the room. Panic set in, and they knew they couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. They had to get out, but the figure blocked their only exit. With no other choice, they steeled themselves and charged towards the figure, hoping to break through. As they neared the shadowy form, it dissipated, vanishing into thin air. The kitchen, once filled with a palpable sense of dread, was now eerily empty. They wasted no time, rushing out of the cabin into the dark forest. The forest loomed around them, but they felt a strange sense of relief, as if they had escaped a great evil. The symbols and the shadowy figure were left behind, but the terror of that night would stay with them forever. Together, they made their way through the forest, determined to find the hidden path they had discovered earlier. The journey was still fraught with danger, but they knew they had to keep moving, to leave the nightmare behind. As dawn broke, they emerged from the trees, exhausted but victorious. The nightmare was over, but the memories would haunt them forever. They hugged each other, grateful to be alive, and vowed never to return to the forest. Their terrifying night in the Canadian cabin was a story they would never forget. The forest, now bathed in daylight, seemed almost peaceful, but they knew the darkness it could hold. They left the cabin behind, a silent witness to their ordeal, driving away. They felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. The forest had changed them, and they knew they would never be the same. The cabin stood empty, a relic of their terrifying night, and the forest returned to its eerie silence. The whispers and shadows remained, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitors, and in the heart of the woods, no one can hear you scream. The forest keeps its secrets, and the terror never truly ends. The narrator's voice trembled as they described the eerie feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound was amplified in the silence of the night. The tension was palpable, and the fear was real. As they stumbled through the dark forest, their hearts pounded with a mix of adrenaline and dread. The trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The path they had discovered earlier seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Desperation set in, and they knew they had to find a way out before whatever was lurking in the shadows found them. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared in the distance. It was the hidden path, illuminated by the first light of dawn. They hurried towards it, their steps quickening with hope. But as they neared the path, a chilling realization struck them. The symbols they had seen in the cabin were etched into the trees lining the path, glowing with an otherworldly light. The air grew colder, and they could feel a presence behind them. Turning slowly, they saw the shadowy figure again, its eyes burning with malevolent intent. It was closer now, almost within reach. Panic surged through them, and they knew they had to act fast. With a burst of courage, they sprinted down the hidden path, the figure in pursuit. The forest seemed to come alive around them, the whispers growing louder, urging them to keep moving. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the woods. Just when they thought they could run no more, they burst into a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in the same cryptic symbols. The figure stopped at the edge of the clearing, unable to cross the threshold. They realized the altar was a sanctuary, a place of protection. Gathering their strength, they approached the altar. As they did, the symbols began to glow brighter, and the figure let out a guttural scream, dissolving into the shadows. The oppressive feeling lifted, and they knew they were safe, at least for now. Exhausted but relieved, they collapsed at the base of the altar. The first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, bathing the clearing in a warm, golden light. The nightmare was finally over, but the memories of that night would haunt them forever. They knew they could never return to the cabin or the forest. The hidden path had saved them, but it held secrets they could never understand. As they made their way back to civilization, they vowed to leave the forest and its terrors behind. The hidden path would remain a mystery, a dark chapter in their lives that they would never forget. And as they walked away, the forest whispered its secrets to the wind, waiting for the next souls to stumble upon its hidden path. As the night went on, the narrator's fear turned into panic. They could hear footsteps approaching the cabin, and the sound of heavy breathing just outside the door. The suspense was unbearable, and the terror was overwhelming. Suddenly the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by the narrator's own ragged breaths. They felt trapped, the walls of the cabin closing in. Just as they were about to make a desperate move, a loud knock echoed through the room. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. A chill ran down their spine as a cold draft swept through the cabin. The shadows seemed to dance, and the symbols on the walls pulsed with a sinister glow. Summoning all their courage, the narrator stepped towards the door, compelled by an unseen force. As they crossed the threshold, the scene outside the cabin was unlike anything they had ever seen. The forest was illuminated by an eerie light, and the trees seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The path they had followed earlier was gone, replaced by a swirling mist that beckoned them forward. They walked cautiously, the mist parting to reveal a hidden clearing. In the center stood an old, decrepit cabin, identical to the one they had just left. The realization hit them like a ton of bricks. They were caught in a loop, a never-ending nightmare. Desperation set in as they searched for a way out. The symbols on the trees glowed brighter, and the air grew colder. Just as they were about to lose hope, a figure emerged from the mist. It was the same shadowy figure that had pursued them before, but this time its eyes were filled with sorrow instead of malice. The figure gestured towards the ancient stone altar in the clearing. With a sense of dread, the narrator approached it. The symbols on the altar began to glow, and a beam of light shot into the sky. The figure let out a mournful wail and dissolved into the mist. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the narrator felt a strange sense of peace. They realized that the figure was a restless spirit trapped in the forest for centuries. By activating the altar, they had set it free. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the mist, the hidden path reappeared. The narrator knew it was time to leave. They walked away from the clearing, the weight of the night's events heavy on their shoulders. The forest seemed to sigh with relief, its secrets finally revealed. The nightmare was over, but the memories would stay with them forever. They vowed never to return to the cabin or the forest, knowing that some mysteries are better left unsolved. As they made their way back to civilization, the forest whispered its final farewell, its secrets now part of the narrator's story.